Context matters. Third lens, the interpersonal lens. This is a bit more of the one-to-one. On a daily basis, your interactions with other humans, it matters that you show up with more humanizing communication. And I'll talk about that. And finally, the communal lens. The lens of the collective, that we are nested within larger groups of humans. That we don't just basically say, oh, I'm only going to live with my family. I don't think you got into this profession because you only want to affect your direct family. I think you got into this profession because you care about the larger community that you live in, or the communities you care about. And so with that, let's get moving. Introspective lens. Humanity-driven people engage in ongoing self-analysis, reflection, and lens checking. What does this look like? We're born with billions of neurons. This group, the reason why I'm nervous about this portion of this group is because this group, more than other groups I've spoken to, has studied the brain, has studied neural pathways, has studied how and why people think and act the way they do. So let me see if I can just break down some psychology 101 that I learned a long time ago. We're born with billions of neurons. These neurons, from the time we're born, or even before we're born, they're making connections, or synaptic connections between the neurons. Every time we process information, every time we touch something, we see something, we receive information, we are processing it along this neurological superhighway called our brain. Now, here's what's interesting about the brain in early development. We know that the brain starts to create really, really powerful coding in our minds. And what are the codes that are being developed? Well, let me take you to, really quickly, to a delivery room. So my partner, my wife's name is Michelle. Our youngest daughter, I'll tell you her full name, and then I'll tell you what we call her. Remember Hawaiian. Her full name is Keha Anuhea no Kealohalani Alele Reyes. Her teachers call her Anu, or they will call her Anu when she goes to school. Let me take you to Utah Valley Regional Medical Center. Okay? Some of you might know that facility fairly well. 2017, January 4th of 2017, Utah Valley Regional Medical Center. Michelle is about to deliver Anu. And I'm sitting in the room. The nurses came by and they brought us a little pamphlet, right? That says, hey, there's just it's like a purple folder from Intermountain Health. Okay? And it has all this information. And on one page, it talks about the skin-to-skin program. And it talks about a program that instead of the nurses taking the newborn child after the umbilical cord is cut over to the warming station to be cleaned and swaddled and then brought back to the exhausted mother. Instead of doing that, which was a practice decades ago, for the past 15 years, they have been doing the skin-to-skin program, which is as soon as the newborn is, the umbilical cord is cut, they place the naked newborn infant against the mother's skin. For what? A connection. An immediate connection. And in the pamphlet, it talks about the research around that sort of imprinting on our brains, that immediate first human-to-human connection. So let me tell you what happened. Anuhea is born. I cut the umbilical cord. The nurses with their rubber gloves take Anuhea. She's crying, folks. They take her, they place her right up on Michelle's upper chest. As soon as she touches down to Michelle's upper chest, Michelle starts caressing Anuhea's cheek and singing to her a song in Navajo. The song is basically 1, 2, buckle my shoe. It's a counting song. Every culture has a counting song, by the way, to learn how to count, right? She starts singing her the song, the same song she sang to her when she was in the womb. Guess what happens? Anuhea quiets down. A few minutes later, Anuhea latches on and nurses for the first time with her mother. What is happening in the brain of Anuhea at that moment? It's not like she has anchor information in her brain. The synaptic connections have been there for her to look at the lights and be like, oh, those are definitely halogen lamps, red lights. Like, do you know what I'm saying? There's not that anchor information. What's happening, rather, is she's starting to gather points of data around air and light and, sound. Boom, first familiar thing. And then pretty soon smell and Michelle's voice, right? And my voice. So here's a photo of Michelle, actually, at that day, and Anuhea. And you see here, from a very early age, my argument is that we start to code our sense of belonging, safety, love, intellect. We start to code a whole bunch of things. And just imagine, just remember what it was like in elementary school. Because I know some of you are like, yep, I think about elementary school all the time. Remember what it was like in your elementary school navigating life and gathering data. You are testing Our young people are testing, they're social scientists. They wear their hair, and they gather feedback. Ooh, I got teased all day. Not wearing my hair like that again, right? And they go and they test other things with authority figures. They react, they make a joke. Ooh, I got in trouble for that. Here's Anuhea, by the way, now. Okay? Yeah. Every morning when I leave to work, she's like, and I'm like, oh, don't give me that face. But Anuhea is 4 now. Now let me jump forward, let me process. What has been processed in her brain in 4 years of gathering information? Does she have more anchor data? Yeah, she knows certain things she shouldn't touch because it's hot. She also knows, right, that when we say we love her, and we give her a hug, that's perhaps what love means. And here's what's interesting, not all children process that in the same way because they don't receive that in the same way. What's interesting about the way we view the world is we view the world the way we do because of certain characteristics. Now what you're seeing is a table that I use with my students. Typically this is a 3-hour exercise that I go over with my students. We're about to do it in a minute. And that is simply this. Take a look at the questions in all 3 of the columns there. Ascribed characteristics are characteristics you were born with, you had no control over. They were ascribed at birth. Now, have you changed in some of these characteristics? Perhaps, because we've grown up in certain ways that we've changed. We learn new languages. You might have shifted political, religious affiliations, or whatever it might be. But the point is that you're still part of the person you are today, and part of the way that you view the world still is affected by your ascribed characteristics. And when I meet with my students, we talk about this, we unpack this. Why? Because it's important for them to know what they have here before they show up as a teacher. They have to know, oh, that really did affect me. Second area, the roles and hats. Nothing shifts our sense of the world around us like responsibilities. I had a colleague whose parents passed away when they were just young teenagers, and this colleague stepped up and had to be sort of a surrogate parent, living with grandparents, and immediately the way they viewed the world shifted because those responsibilities shifted. I'll tell you, when my oldest, Keikoa, who's now a sophomore at Mountain View High School, when he was born, and I brought him home for the first time, and I sat him on the bed, and he was just lost in his little onesie there, and he was strapped into the car seat. I sat him on the bed, and I just sat there, and for like 3 hours, I just watched him. And I was like, is he breathing? I was like, Michelle, come in here really quick, is he? And I'm like, yep, he's breathing. And she's like, you know you can like let him rest. And I'm like, no, but it's a tough one. And then fast forward, if I see a child running in a park and I don't see like some parental figure like near them, I get super nervous. I'm like, who does that child belong to? And then I don't want to be creepy and go up to the child and be like, hey, I just from a distance. And what is that? How do I view the world? I view the world through that father lens now of like, holy cow, I've got to watch. And I'm looking out for especially vulnerable young people, right? Experiences. This is the catch-all. This last column is what life experiences have you had that have affected your state of mind, your state of living, your state of thinking. And these can both be positive and negative experiences, but these affect, folks, who we trust, who we don't trust. It affects the very professions that we end up in. Our life experiences affect where we live, where we decide to, what relationships we decide to have because of past relationships. And what's really interesting is, if we don't do the introspective look inward of our own humanity first, it really is hard for us to start to really get to know other humans at a deeper level. We don't see things as they are, we see things as we are. This is a profound quote by Augustine, who really helps us see that there's not this objectivity of an event out here. It's a subjective interpretation of an event from all of our perspectives. And so when my students come to UVU, and even if they come to my office frantic about financial aid or parking or classes or something, they come to my office. Before we ever talk about what their issue is, I say, can you just, before we get into whatever I can help you with today, can you just tell me your journey to UVU? Like just 2 minutes. Just tell me how you got here. And that does 2 things. One, it situates for me the context in which I can best help them. Number 2, it brings down the temperature a little bit in terms of putting in perspective that they're on a journey. this parking ticket or this financial aid processing isn't the ending or the beginning, isn't the end of their college where they don't have to get it done in that moment. I want them to realize that it's part of the journey. We don't see things as they are, we see things as we are. Let me just share a couple of stories. How many in here are left-handed? Raise your hand if you're left-handed. Hi. A few of you left-handers, just raise your right hand. I'm not sure, but okay. Left-handers. Because of the size of this group, I'm not going to engage in this necessarily because of time. But just nod your head if this resonates with you. Left-handers, what are ways that you know that you're living in a predominantly right-handed world? Now, let me just go through a couple of these. That little wooden desk that comes up on the seat on the side is primarily on the right side. When you sit at a restaurant, you have to be cognizant of where you're sitting so that you don't bump elbows with people that you're eating next to, right? When you write on a dry erase board, you have to be sure not to erase with this hand what you just wrote. When you write in a 3-ring binder, that's the worst thing in the world, right? Sporting equipment, try to go find sporting equipment for left-handers. Oh, by the way, if you have any writing utensil, right, any pen or pencil or anything near you, look at it in your right hand, and you can read it. Switch it to your left hand, it's upside down. I have not found a writing utensil that is made for it to be read with the left hand. Conducting music for many years was conducting always with the right cadence. Military. I've understood that so many of the practices with military operations have been right-hand dominant. Go on and on and on. Now, how many right-handers here have a very close relationship with the left-hander? And you can still empathize with some of the things that I just said there. Here's the point. Left-handers have to process things a little bit differently in life because they're not the majority. Right-handers, how many of you have thought about your right-handedness often? Unless you hurt your right hand and you had to use your left hand. Right? How many of you had to process that? Here's my point. If you don't have to process something because you're in the majority, then at that moment, you have the privilege of not having to spend any energy, emotional energy, physical energy to wonder how you're going to navigate a situation. Second story, my dad was an Elvis impersonator. I kid you not. He passed away last year, amidst COVID. We just flew him to his ashes to Hawaii, buried him about a month and a half ago. And he lived to be 80. He's from the Philippines. Folks, a big debate among our siblings, my brother, my sister, and I, who gets dad's Elvis outfits? When we were younger, he would tuck us into bed at night and he would sing to us with the guitar, he'd sing to us Elvis songs. And I kid you not, when we play his music, my kids are like, or we play Elvis records, they're like, it's Mama Buddy, it's Mama Buddy. He sounds like Elvis. I would get that every night. He'd do impersonations. He would do jokes. He would tell us stories. And by the way, every child gets that, right? Every single child has that wonderful privilege of having a parent or guardian tuck them in bed every night after a full meal, kiss them on the forehead, tell them they love them, and sing to them. Every child gets that, right? No. Well, I didn't know that. Growing up, I thought this is the experience of every child until later on I started to realize, wow, not every one of my friends and classmates had that. I had that privilege of not wondering if I was going to be hit, not wondering if I was going to get a meal that night. I had the privilege. Folks, I'm not a bad person because I had privilege. What happens, though, is when we start to say, oh, no, you can't blame anything on me. There's no way I have. If you haven't had to check your identity when you enter a space, if you haven't had to wonder if your accent is going to be accepted when you speak up, because when you spoke up in class one day and some kid laughed at your accent and you're like, I don't want to speak up again. If you haven't had to process that, then it's okay that you have privilege. Part of the argument is, what are you going to do with that? Are you going to be sensitive enough to say, not everybody got this? Not everybody has this. And by the way, my partner, my wife, Michelle, when she was a senior, she played softball. She was a cheerleader. She was the editor of the yearbook. And her senior year of high school, she got into an accident on the Navajo Nation. They hit a horse. She was driving 170 yards. She lost her left arm. It was severed in the drag. Gravel in her hip to this day. Skin grafts all over her left side. Life flight to Flagstaff, Arizona. And folks, when I met her, we started dating. She said, you know that I just want you to be aware, I don't have it. I said, yeah, it's fine. She goes, well, it's just been an issue with some other folks. I'm like, okay. As we got married and were thinking about having children, and she tearfully said, I wonder if I can do this with one hand. Fast forward, we have 7 children. Michelle is an amazing human being. That's our older daughter, Kaimi. That's not Photoshop, that's Michelle's sleeve that comes down midway in front of her home in Ganado, Arizona. Folks, on a daily basis, I recognize my able-bodied privilege in terms of the things that I don't have to think about. Michelle has to process everything, even 20 years after an accident, she has to process, okay, when we cut an onion with one hand, we've got this special cutting board with prongs, and you just put the onion right there, and okay, we figured it out. But I have the privilege of not having to think about that when I do daily tasks. So here's the thing. What I don't want to do is have some controversial moment where people are like, whoa, let's not get into debate about privilege right now. I just want to invite us to consider. This is not about who has it and who doesn't. I think we all have it at some level, and I think we all don't have it at some level. I think we need to more importantly recognize that if we don't unpack some of our biases and privileges, then we're not going to show up authentically and meaningfully for others. It's going to be hard for us to show up authentically and meaningfully for others because at some level our empathy hits a wall. And you see this in the definitions. I won't read through those here on both privilege and bias. So to wrap up this lens checking to me for your introspective lens is simply to ask yourself a number of questions. How and why do I view the world the way I do? And why does that matter in the way that I show up for others? I remember one professor, colleague of mine, who said, no excuses. If they miss a deadline, they miss a deadline. And they're going to get graded down for it. And I said, but life happens, right? And I go, can you imagine if you're treated that way? And then he said, I was treated that way. That's how my parents raised me. No excuses. And I said, can we unpack that for a second? Because I don't know if that's a positive thing for our students moving forward, that we set up these unrelenting sort of no exceptions. Now, will life be like that? Yes. But as educators, our commitment is to help students develop and on their journey and say, when life happens, you still have supports. We haven't lowered our standard. You still have to fulfill the assignment. But we're going to give you a few more days. And we're going to figure this out. Because what happens when we put up those hard lines? Boom. I'm not college material. I'm checking out. I drop out. And folks, there are folks in this room who probably had those experiences at some point in their lives. Contextual lens. Humanity-driven people study and engage with diversity of history, thought, and perspective. You all know through your schooling experience that there is a lot of information you learn, and then there's some information you had to unlearn from your schooling experience, or you had to relearn or rethink the moment you start to get exposure to new and diverse stories. Here's our view. Our view is nested within, constantly, right, all of this context here. And you can't say that your view isn't affected by all of these factors, right? All of those factors around that flower. It is. It may not always be present, but it's affecting how you view the world. If you haven't seen this TED Talk by Chimamanda Adichie, I invite you to do so. Chimamanda Adichie, by the way, poet, author, like 8 books now, short story author, poet. Her sort of breakthrough TED Talk, Danger of a Single Story. The punchline is this. I'm not going to recap the whole thing, but the punchline is essentially this. In the absence of exposure to diversity, in the absence of exposure to diverse perspectives, we believe the single story about the other. Okay? That's the punchline, that's the thesis. In the absence of exposure to diversity, we believe the single story about the other. Now, how does this happen psychologically? How does this happen? I show this picture, I show this photo to my students every year, and every year, less and less students know what this is. One student told me, I saw that on Harry Potter. And I thought to myself, thank you. That's along with the abacus. Thank you. The Bunsen burner that is still in use, by the way. Imagine our brains are filled wall to wall with these card catalog boxes, and every box contains information that you both deliberately put there, but also You just passively consume, because what? We're humans, and we observe media. And so you open up a box of your favorite foods, or the foods you hate. Think of a food you absolutely hate, by the way. You're like, ooh, just thinking about it. Open up that box in your brain. How many cards are in that box? Meaning, how many experiences have you had with that food? And you open up the card and you're like, yep, that was a negative one at age 3, still negative at age 14, and I still hate it today. There's not too many cards in that box, because why? I avoided eating that food. Meanwhile, in other things, in another box, you've got a bunch of favorites, you've got friends, you've got all these other things in your brain. These are called schema, or the categories in which we organize information so we can retrieve it quickly. Now here's the interesting thing about diversity related to these boxes. Eduardo Bonilla Silva out of Duke University did a study where he invited groups of people to respond at different times, different years, to different prompts. He said, though, I'm going to say a word, and I want you to think about the first image that comes to your mind of a person. It's going to be a person. The first image, and don't overthink it, don't overanalyze it, because an image will come to your mind. When I say the word, and he would do it. And he'd do a number of words over different years. Well, the word terrorist, boom, by the way, an image came to your mind. The word terrorist, he noticed, in different years, had different majority images coming to people's minds. And in 2004, when he started to do this, remember, context is everything. In 2004, what was the prevailing image in the Eduardo Bonilla Silva study? Middle Eastern male. In 2004, context. So what did he do? He started to unpack that a little bit. And what I've done since then is I've tried to unpack with the groups I work with to talk about pulling out that box in your brain about Muslim, Middle Eastern male, any experience that you would equate with the Middle East, and why, and how many of the cards in that box are positive and how many are negative. And here's what I usually do in a class, as we talk about that, we say, those that have majority positive, why do you have them positive? And they said, here's some things. Because I took classes about, I have meaningful friendships with, I visited the lands of, I have seen documentaries about, so what's that? It's all about that engagement. They have intentionally stepped into difference so that they can understand. And here's what naturally happens. Their positivity index on that particular identity group went up. And so here's the thing that I'm inviting us to. Some people talk about getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. I don't know anybody in here who naturally is like, yes, that's my goal. That is my goal, to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. Rather, I think I want to invite us to become better and have a healthier disposition towards difference by leaning into healthy dissonance. And so healthy dissonance is when you have exposure to diversity, we can do a couple of things. We can engage or we can disengage. And we know which one leads to progress. It's the engagement, folks. And I want us to have a caveat here. Engagement with diversity does not mean agreeing at the end of the conversation. It's not consensus building. We don't have to walk away and say, oh, one of us had to win, so you had to come to my side politically, or I had to go to your side politically. It can simply be that we respect each other's opinions because we know where it's coming from, but we can still disagree. Engaging, though, gives us what? More context. It helps us next time not to jump to conclusions and not to put people into boxes or stereotypes. It helps us to pause in a mature way when it comes to humanity. It helps us to remember that we're working with another human who doesn't have the intentions to make your life miserable that day. They simply want what? To find their own purpose and meaningful connection for themselves, and they might be having a pretty crappy day. Engage with counter stories. A quick story for you is that I grew up as a graffiti artist. Community decorating, some called tagger. We said street writer. In 93 to 96, I graduated high school in 1996, Canoga Park High School. You can look up Canoga Park High School in the heart of the San Fernando Valley, right off the 101 freeway. And I was in a tagging crew. I was not gangbanging. I'm not a violent person. I'm not even a tough person. I'm an artist. I've always been an artist. My dad was an artist from the Philippines, and I had art supplies throughout my life. I sat on some task forces here about a dozen years ago, working with the likes of Tony Castillo and Kobe Klein and a number of my colleagues who we worked with juvenile detention, we worked with gang prevention. And in one particular meeting, they were talking about these young artists as if they were just horrible humans. Vandals. Can you believe what they're doing to our neighborhood? And I was like, I should speak. I was like, I'm on this task force. I know I worked at the time, I was the chief of staff to President Holland at UVU. And I just said, can I just talk for a moment about the very young people that you're talking about? That was me not too long ago, and I really would appreciate it if we could reframe this conversation. And I would like to invite, if you're okay with it, task force, we'd like to do a program at UVU called Hidden Voices. And so what we did was we invited 14 young artists who had a juvenile record with Judge Noonan, Judge Davis, a lot of the judges in this area, right, in this community. And we just said we want them to come to this UVU program for about a year. And we want their graffiti art to be displayed in our UVU Museum of Art at the University Place, at University Mall. Guess what was there before we displayed this exhibit, by the way? The Traveling Da Vinci exhibit. So here you go from Da Vinci to our street artists. It was awesome. We worked with 8 young artists in the end, 14, and what happened was we were working on their GED, we were working on helping them write their artist statements, we were helping them in a number of ways. They read their first book with us. And this wasn't part of my job, you know, as the chief of staff to the president, you don't sit there and be like, okay, let me go to my other part of my job and do, no, this was like my candy. This was after hours. This is my passion. And so after I would work with the president all day, and I'd go and we'd work on these art projects. And so they were mentored. And they were given art supplies by Pro Art and Frame. They were donated spray cans and canvases and whatnot. They curated the museum themselves. They wrote their art statements. They did a documentary, Why Do You Write? And the evening of the opening exhibit, there's my boys back there. Remember the one I said is the sophomore at Mountain View? He's over there climbing on chairs at the time. We hosted a dinner the night of the opening exhibit. We said to them and their families, and by the way, all 8 young men, their families spoke Spanish, and I speak Spanish. So I was going back and forth on what we call Inglés Español, or Spanglish. And I was talking to the young people, and I was talking to the parents, and I was saying, basically, be proud of the work you did tonight. You're displaying your artwork in a museum of art. This is not just some small museum. This is a legit museum of art. We gave them each white ties, black collar shirts, exhibitor badges, and I said, remember what we've been working on. You took public speaking with us. So when somebody comes up to you tonight and says, tell me about your art piece, don't just stand there and be like, I don't know, I like colors and stuff. Because that's how they started, by the way. That's how they started when we were like, hey, why do you write? Why do you do your artwork? And they're like, because. You want to expound on that? Yeah, because whatever. All right, I got you. So I said, how many people do you think can come tonight? Well, Reyes, how much food you get? Well, P.F. Chang's downstairs donated for like 100 people. Literally, they were like, what? We're gonna have 100 people tonight? I said, well, did you pass out the flyers? They're like, we kind of spread them around the parking lot. How did you spread them around? Well, we saw the cops and we just threw them up in the air. Dang it. We gotta go clean that up, folks. And then we opened the exhibit, and their grandparents and parents. And Nicolas Solis, his grandmother, came up to me. And in Spanish, she's talking, and she puts her hands on my cheeks, and basically she's translating, I'm so proud of my Nikki. I'm so excited to be here tonight. Jonathan, his artist statement in the back of him, Word is Born. He read his first book cover to cover with our program. He found his voice. It's not a hidden voice anymore because it's through his reading and education. Conundrum, Nikki's piece, graffiti, half angelic, half demonic. He thinks he's an artist, but people paint him as a vandal. Serenity, Albert Ansar. He tagged his street name 100 times, came over the top of it, and said, I'm leaving the chaos of my past life. I'm going to find my voice through education. Oh, and by the way, I'm always going to be centered in my art. That's a spray can, that's his heart right there. Venom. The best part of this photo, folks, is not the piece itself. Meaning, I'm not going to just use my art to spray back or push back against the hatred people are bringing to me as a young artist. The best part of this photo is that young man standing next to Nestor, he was told his whole life, don't you be like your older brother. And that night, he would not leave his side. Think about that. His parents told him, don't be like him, and then that night, he had smiles the whole time. Because what happened? 540 people came that night. And then President Holland showed up. I happened to put it on his calendar. I controlled his calendar at the time. He showed up with 8 admissions letters to UVU and 2 honor scholarships for our 2 lead artists. 6 have received bachelor's degrees. 1 received an associate's. 1 made some tough decisions as an adult and never went back to college. But folks, the reason why I talk about leaning into healthy dissonance is because we have so many in our community who are waiting for anybody to lean into them. They feel like they are the healthy dissonance. This is the group who feels underheard or underserved, or they don't have the purpose, they don't have the meaningful connections. Our humanity improves when we help others find those very things and help them find that context. And so you see it here on what I put on the slide. Let's let humanity push us to lean into discomfort. This is healthy dissonance. My invitation for us is that we can do healthy dissonance in primarily 4 ways. First, exposure. If you don't know what you don't know, that's where exposure to diversity comes in, because just by sheer nature of exposure to diverse perspectives, lenses, histories, narratives, and people, we will be invited to consider things anew. Second, education, formal and informal. We can opt into classes, we can opt into professional development opportunities. The fact that you showed up to this today means that you are getting an education to further your abilities in your professions. Engagement. Engagement goes beyond just education, because I can receive education in the comforts of my home and watch a TED Talk, or I can read a book. Engagement requires me to interact now with another human and to actually learn from another human. And then finally, immersion. And let me walk you through why this matters when it comes to immersion. Because if you're in a majority, and the moment you step into a space where you feel like you are not the one being heard or seen or validated, it helps you to reframe. It helps you to consider. When you're immersed in a new context, fully immersed into a new context. A quick example of this is a colleague of mine who asked me, how do I learn about Native American students? We can serve them better. I said, great. Here's the first book you can read, Bury My Heart on Wounded Knee. All right? You can read a couple of other books here. You can see this TED Talk. Oh, and by the way, come visit our students over in the Native American Initiative at UVU, the Multicultural Student Services, and just talk. And part of that is engagement. Oh, I want to go to an event. Well, come to our powwow. Well, what time does it start? Well, here's the thing. It starts at 6 p.m. on Friday, goes to about 10 p.m. on Saturday. Yeah, but when's the main event? Well, here's the thing. The main event's from 6 p.m. this Friday to 10 p.m. on Saturday. It's a different time dynamic. You don't show up for a 1-hour meeting. When you go to a powwow, you sit and you listen to the rhythms of the drums and you just observe the interactions between the young people and the elders, and you look at the regalia. They're not called costumes. This is called regalia, native regalia that they wear because they're ceremonial dances. So he came and stayed for a good portion of time. And then immersion. I took 7 of my students to do part of their student teaching on Navajo Nation. And folks, they're back here teaching now, but they can never unsee those 7 weeks being immersed and being the ones who had to kind of look to others to understand how to navigate that world. Okay? So, interpersonal lens. And I know I'm running on out of time here, but let's get through this. Interpersonal lens. Humanity-driven people learn from and improve empathy for diverse individuals. One of the things that I talk about with my students, so imagine every one of your round tables right now. Imagine that's an island, right? And the way that you would need to build a bridge, the reason why you need to build a bridge is because there's a chasm, there's a gap between the 2 islands. If you're connected, if I'm connected like this whole thing is connected, I don't need a bridge. You need a bridge when there is a distance, when there is a misunderstanding, when there's a chasm, right? Well, it's hard to build bridges to land masses we don't even acknowledge. It's hard to build bridges to experiences when we don't recognize them as holding value. And so interpersonal relationships begins with our desire to actually recognize that there's people we want to build bridges with. Here's a list of things that I'll just discuss briefly, and that is how do we improve in our humanity with interpersonal communication and interpersonal lens development? When it comes to humanizing our communication, I'm going to talk about 6 things, 1 slide on each. Courageous empathy, cultural humility, genuine inquiry, names, naming, and humanizing words, value and validate. And by the way, I am arguing that those 2 words are different, and advocacy and allyship. Courageous empathy. We know what empathy is. This group really knows what empathy is. On a daily basis, your empathy grows because of your experiences and your engagement with humans. What courageous empathy invites us to do is to say it's easy to have empathy with somebody in our professional role, perhaps, or with somebody that we shares our perspectives on life. It's harder to have empathy with somebody who disagrees with us passionately. And so courageous empathy says, can we at least lean in to engage and to treat them as humans? Right? This goes back to this civility, this humanity that we all are in need of. And can we set aside time, resources, and energy to learn the challenges someone else might be facing? And that's even in the face of disagreement. That leads to courageous conversations. And I'll just say for this slide, and I try not to read all the slides here just to give you the nugget. The most meaningful interactions I've had, or the change that I've seen take place in people's lives, have come about because of what? A one-to-one interaction. Somebody spoke up, somebody listened. Another person spoke up, another person listened. And think about your relationships. When did your relationships grow? There's a reason why retreats work when you're trying to do team building. It's just the sheer time of conversation between humans. Okay? Cultural humility is simply the invitation to say, no matter my background, my education, my perspectives, my experiences, I actually believe I can learn from somebody else. That cultural humility, I'm not talking about, oh, this race has to be culturally humble when interacting with this race, or this gender, or this orientation, or this experience. What I'm talking about is all of us actually believing that somebody, no matter their age, no matter their background, has a richness of their life as a human where I can actually learn something from them. And for us to approach that in that way, when my students went down to the Navajo Nation to go do student teaching, the teachers down there, first when they were partnering up, they said, great, we'd love to partner with you so we can learn some new teaching methods. And I said, are you kidding me? My students are coming to learn from you. You've been teaching for 20 years. My students are students. And they're like, yeah, but they're at a school of education, learning the latest and greatest. And I said, but that's not the purpose of them coming down. They were taking classes on classroom management and curriculum development and design. What they're coming down for is to understand how to see students, how to really see students, right, through your experiences. Genuine inquiry. Some people have asked me, Kyle, how do I ask questions without offending? Can I ask questions of people to learn more about their cultures and not without offending them? And my answer every time is, if you do so with genuine inquiry and if you keep showing up. Meaning, you can't do a flyby question and you show up to an event and you're like, I support this, awesome, and one question is, so why do those people do that kind of thing? What's that all about, right? It's more of really understanding, right? And understanding the operations, understanding the foundation of those events, those experiences, right? And then to keep showing up. I will say, as somebody who's received many questions about my background and culture, I'm not offended when some folks ask me and they say, oh, how do you pronounce your children's names? And I say it, and they said, I'm not sure how to get it. I'm like, that's okay. It took my in-laws a while to get the Hawaiian side, it took my family a while to get the Navajo side, it's okay. But if they kept showing up with that inquiry, we have a relationship, that genuine inquiry matters a lot in humanizing communication. Names, naming, and humanizing words. Names matter, folks. How we self-identify matters. I know some people think that we get into a point where it's too politically correct and we can't keep up with the language. And in some cases, and in some situations, each of you will have to draw your own line about what that is, about whether or not people are getting too sensitive about certain things. Here's what I do know, is that as an individual, you care about how you're labeled. You care, I care. One experience I had with a student who I was reading off the roll, and I said her name, or at least I thought I said her name correctly, and then she said, you know what, just call me Jenny. And I go, but it's Is that what you prefer? She goes, well, it's easier for everybody. And I said, but can you do me a favor, can you pronounce your name of origin? She said, Xin Yi Wu. I said, Xin Yi, can you tell us a little about it? She told us about her name. And then I said, do you mind if I refer to you as Xin Yi? And she said, well, you'd be the first teacher to do so. And I said, am I even pronouncing it correctly? She said, eh. So I said, can you help me? And she said, Xin Yi, and I said, Xin Yi, and she's like, I swear, I think I'm saying exactly as you're saying, but there was intonation, I was missing something, and then all of a sudden, I said it one way, I got it, and then I said it again, and I didn't get it. And what mattered to her was my effort. Because after class, she came up to me and she said, you're the first teacher who ever tried to actually call me by my original name. That matters to me. She goes, I only chose Jenny because it was so hard for her. I'm like, okay, let's have your classmates call you. If you're okay with that. Folks, there are entire organizations that want to be called a specific thing. There's entire religions that say, please call me by this, not by this. There's entire groups that say, you can refer to me in this way, but again, I identify in this way. Humanizing communication simply says, names matter to people. Labels, I know labels can be dangerous, but labels also matter in terms of my experience. All right? Humanizing words, value and validate. Here's my basic difference between these two. Valuing someone or another individual, especially, is that we actually value their whole identity, their whole self, that we can learn from them, and we value what they bring to the table. Validate means I actually believe you when you say you're experiencing the world the way you are. Here's the difference, and here's where some people go like, oh, I validate you. Well, you might value me, meaning you might value my representation of my identity. And you might even value me as an individual. But I just told you, Kyle, you be you. We need to improve in this area because of my experience. And instead of me saying, well, that's not what other people like you said, other people that share your identity have had a good experience, validation actually says, you know what, you're right, and I believe that that's how you experienced you, and I'm so sorry. But we gotta get better. And we will get better. Because I actually am validating at that moment that you are having a unique experience navigating you, even though I valued you before you even told me that. Allyship and advocacy simply invites us to consider in our interpersonal communications, folks, that the moment we are attuned to inequities in the world, the moment we are attuned to the fact that other people are not, don't have perhaps same privileges, opportunities, experiences, that we speak up, that we actually advocate, so that all folks are treated like humans. The last lens, communal lens. Humanity-driven people connect with, live groups, and communities. And you'll see a bunch of questions there. I'm not going to go through those questions. You can see them, you can answer them in your own mind, but think about what can you consider to be your communities? Folks, I've got a bunch of communities. The art community alone, cultural art, graffiti art, my father did Western art. I self-identify with various communities culturally. I self-identify with a number of affinity groups. I love drawing comics and marble and all that stuff. And I identify with various communities. When I say us lifting the community, it's lifting any nesting and any group of humans that are in our spheres of influence. So what can leaders do to improve intercultural competence organizationally and as a community? There's a word that's been put out there now by Harvard Business Review called communityship. It's not leadership, it's communityship. And that idea is, instead of focusing on the leader and the development of the leader and individual leadership capabilities and qualities and traits, let's focus on the development of the community as collective communityship. How do we as a community develop, grow, and develop certain traits where it's not isolated with one person, but it's the collective of all of us in this group, in this community, complementing one another because of that. We can do an organizational lens check, where it's not just an individual looking inward, but it's organizations getting culturally humble. I've come across and I've consulted with a number of organizations over the past decade, where I come in and I talk with them and they say, hey, can you help us fix this diversity issue? like, first of all, hello. Let's get to know each other. And then we start talking about, I think, cool, what are you trying to do? Are you trying to solve a PR problem? Or are you actually trying to create change for the right reasons? And what's interesting about an organizational lens check is I've worked with organizations is there's some organizations that are not culturally humble. They're like, well, we have a vocal minority who's like just talking all the time about how horrible we are, but there's always that in the group. And I'm like, well, so what are they saying? Well, but you got to kind of bracket that information because it's just, no, but what are they saying? How are they experiencing your organization? Folks, that matters. It matters how every one of our employees and every one of our team members is experiencing doing organizational lens check. Let me just share with you the last few slides here, and that is, at UVU, it was mentioned I was a senior diversity officer in 2014. And I know sometimes in various communities when I show up as a diversity officer, people are like, oh, here we go again, diversity stuff. And in doing diversity work in Utah County, can I just share with you, when I go travel to national conferences, people are always like, oh, you're doing diversity work in Utah County, how's that going? And I'm like, it's going awesome. It's going awesome. And here's why. Starting about 7 years ago, we started to really reframe this work not as a diversity, some agenda, some political agenda. This is all about, at the end of the day, preparing students to become better community members, to become more humanized community members in the world, right? So we launched a 36 action step plan. We're now on our second plan, the 70 action steps. And I just want to share with you 4 slides. It's small font on purpose, meaning I just want to show you the sheer volume of stuff in just the past 6 years that UVU has done to try to be more equitable, inclusive, and diverse campus. So I'll give you like 20 seconds to just glance through a few of those bullets on each slide. That's 1 of 4, slide 2 of 4. Slide 3 of 4. You go to our website and look up all this data, by the way. Slide 4 of 4. And notice the date. That was up till 2020. Just in this last year, our new senior diversity officer is about to put our annual report out this in a couple of months, listing about 30 more things that we've done just in this past year amidst COVID. Folks, when it comes to humanizing our efforts, again, let's reframe this. This is not, in my mind, this is not some political effort, some mega agenda. This is, at the end of the day, we have an opportunity to connect with other really amazing humans. On a daily basis, you get an opportunity. You're doing so today. I'll wrap up with one quick story, and that is, let me just check my timing. One quick story. I'm going to come over here, hopefully you can still see me on this side. What I didn't tell you in terms of my career and how I got to where I'm at is after the graffiti life in high school, I had a teacher who in the 10th grade, when I was working on my artwork, she came over to me and she said, what are you doing? And I said, I'm not doing my homework, I'm not doing my work right now. She said, put that away. And she said, come see me after class. And I thought, what every 10th grade graffiti artist thinks, okay, she's going to take away my notebook. She's going to send me to the principal's office in Oak Park High School. And what she did after that is I went up to her desk and she said, how long have you been doing artwork? And I said, what? Why was that question so shocking to me? She was the first authority figure outside of my father who called what I was doing art. And I said, I've been drawing my whole life. And she said, you should take AP Studio Art next year. You're really good. But do me a favor, don't do a different class. I said, deal. And she goes, but I noticed that I see your artwork throughout school more and more on people's, because guess what, in 1992, you all remember this, they went from the vinyl binders to the binder that has a plastic that you can slip artwork in and out of. This is groundbreaking in 1992, folks. No longer the need for the trapper keeper. Anybody? Trapper keeper? So my artwork was showing up all over Canoga Park High School. Why? Because they could put, I would tag up their name. And most of my friends were Latina or Latino, and so they would, one would be, I was like, Jesus would be like, hey, just make my name look good. I'm like, all right. Yeah, just put Chewy like in purple. Because you know the Lakers. Yeah, of course, Chewy. Veronica, what do you, I just wanted to say Vero. Well, what colors do you want? Choose whatever. Good, just choose something. I'm like, all right, Vero. I said, I have third period or fourth period to get this done for you. She's like, okay. Well, Miss Schwartz was there. I got into AP Studio Art my junior year. It blew my mind, folks. Because in that class, I learned that I could be a storyteller through my artwork. And right now, what I do is I do art workshops for young people where we design shoes together so they can walk with their story. We design shoes that tell their story so that they can have different ways of expressing their story. Oh, and by the way, young people gravitate towards art. I don't know if you knew that. Now, they're not all artists in that way, but they gravitate towards expression, poetry, slam poetry, spoken word, music, dance, art, some artistic expression. Our young people are gravitating towards that, and it's interesting. Right now, digital media, it's blowing up as a major at UVU and BYU and a lot of these other universities. Why? Because students are finding that they can tell stories. Why do people want to tell their story? Relevance and purpose, connection. Fast forward, I failed out of my first 3 attempts at college. I got a .78 cumulative GPA after 3 semesters of college. College was not for me. By the way, .78, folks, that means I actually tried in one class, which was my art class every semester, and then didn't show up for the other classes. But how did I get connected, or how did I start to turn the corner? I joined a multicultural dance group. I started to learn the Polynesian dances of my heritage, and for 12 years, I did Polynesian dancing, and hip-hop dancing, and Latin dancing. And then when I met Michelle, I started to learn the heritage of the Iowa people and the Dene people, started to do more study. I realized I wanted to go out and get more education. Got my bachelor's in graphic design, worked at a company called New Skin as a graphic designer, sat in my cubicle all day, and I was like, I'm not fulfilled. I liked New Skin as a company, I just didn't want to design for them. And somebody said, why don't you come volunteer with a program at UVSC in 2003? I said, sure. I would go to work at New Skin, and in the evenings, I'd go talk to young people who were first in their families that could go to college. They're called first generation. There's probably a number of first generation in this room right now. You were the first in your families to get a bachelor's degree. These young people, I would go and I'd take my sketchbook and we'd just draw. We'd talk about life, and then ACT, and FAFSA. You know, all things young people want to talk about. At the end of that summer, a woman comes up to me and she says, the director of the Upper Bound program, she says, I want you to know that we're going to offer you a job here full-time with benefits for 20 a year. And I was like, thank you. And September 4th, 2003, I started my career at Utah Valley State College as a college dropout, as a graffiti artist. 18 years later, and 7 jobs, and 3 degrees later, I love working with students. I love it. I get to be a vice president of a dynamic division at Utah Valley University of Student Affairs, Mental Health, Multicultural, LGBT Student Services, Women's Success, Veterans, First Gen, Admissions, Financial Aid. What's not to like about that? And on a daily basis, I get to hear stories that enrich my life. And so with that, I would love to connect. If you found anything that I said today useful, or there's a follow-up question, please reach out to me. My email is there. I'm on social media. More importantly, thank you for all the work that you do. Thank you for your strength and you showing up. And I'll leave with a Hawaiian chant, if that's okay. I know I'm over time. Are there any Hawaiians in the audience? I can't see hands. No Hawaiians? Oh, thank you. Okay. The only reason why I ask is so that you can't judge me on my singing. So, here we go. Kumakoni amano kuna kunui maunela Keanue, Eko vale no. Thanks so much for letting me do this today.
Thank you very much, Dr. Reyes. Can I have one more round of applause for Dr. Reyes? All right, this is just the beginning of what will be an informative and action-packed day. We're going to move the conference up to the third floor at this point, where we will go into various breakout rooms based on which presentations you'd like to attend. We have about 13 minutes before those start. We will need to check in each room for contact tracing for COVID. So please don't delay in heading up to the classes you'd like to attend next.